welcome to A Time to Thrill. It's me, your host, Aime Austin. This month I have the joy of speaking with podcaster Kara Infante, who is the host of the podcast Bookish Flights. It's super interesting to talking to a reader who is a creator but not a writer. Obviously, I spend a lot of time talking to writers. Even one of the painters I have on the show is a writer. This conversation is super interesting because we talk about what women do to enhance their creative lives in light of everything else that's going on. I think we've talked about this previously in many contexts, but maybe it's gelled a little bit more here. A common thread among the women I interview is the accommodation that they have to make for family. It is well known that men don't have to necessarily make these accommodations. There have been a ton of books about this in the last couple of years. But bottom line, just because women have children or move to follow their husband's career does not mean that their creativity goes away. And what I find quite fascinating is the amount of creativity that brilliant women creators have and the ways that they adapt that, as well as pursue careers that can fit around family life. So I hope you enjoyed this April conversation. Okay, so April. So this comes out on April Fool's Day. No jokes here. I'm super excited because this month finally is the release of His Last Mistress. If you haven't pre-ordered it, please do it now. Pre-orders help authors in unimaginable ways. I have been out promoting this book in various places, and I'm certainly share those links with you as they come up. What I think is super interesting about this book, it's actually the same to many of my books, but it's the reaction to the ending. The book has been out to reviewers, and 99% of them love the book, love the story, and get up in the fast-paced storytelling to get to that ending. Some of the best reactions I've actually received in the last few weeks is that readers have said they didn't see the twists coming, which as an author, I cannot tell you how satisfying that is. And I will say this as a writer, and I shared this with someone in the last couple of weeks. I too did not see the twist coming. I wrote the story. It was like sort of leaning one way as an ending. And I thought to myself one day when I was out walking or biking or doing something physical, this is actually not the ending. The ending is something different. And that new ending came to me. And I really like it. Endings are not my strong suit for books. I'm so strong in the beginning, but I do really struggle with endings. But for once, I really think the twist in this ending is compelling and packs a punch. So with all that said, the book is coming out April 24. Pre-order it now, and it'll appear in your e-reader sometime between like April 23rd and 25th. Those world clocks are a mess, and every retailer seems to have a different definition of midnight. With that said, let's get to this interview. I'll say this, and I think I may have talked about this during the podcast, but I did find it hilarious that when I was talking to my son about interviewing Kara, he had no idea what a flight was. And I was like, wine flights, whiskey flights, there are many flights. But this is the first time that I've ever encountered Bookish Flights. I think you'll love the concept and love this interview. So without further ado, Bookish Flights podcaster Kara Infante. Hi, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. It's me, your host, Aime Austin. This month, I have the delight of speaking with Kara Infante, who is a podcast host of a podcast called Bookish Flights. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Aime.
How are you?
I am doing good today. You know, my mom is visiting, so I got help with my kiddos, and that's always nice to have an extra set of hands around the house.
I don't. Yes. I was just actually so I'm still friends with the woman who is the nanny for my son. And so we were just talking about raising children, and she was like, an extra pair of hands is always good. And I was like, yes, I had you. Like yes. So I appreciate hands no matter how you get them.
Absolutely.
So you live in San Diego. I spent a summer in San Diego when I was 16. I had decided that California was this magical place that I might want to live one day. And my mother's like, you should spend some time there. And we had a family friend who lived in San Diego. So I spent the summer in San Diego, and it turned me into a California convert.
So we lived here for 1 year, and then we had to move away, and we've been back, and we are going to hit it. We're like, our 4th year is coming up this summer. So my husband's in the military, and so we move quite a bit, but we actually will be here for 6 years this round, which is amazing. We've never got to stay somewhere that long.
Wow. That's actually great. And I think the weather actually in San Diego is actually, I can't say this out loud, better than LA. I really like the...
Interesting. See, I've only driven through LA, so I can't speak to LA much.
It's a little hotter here, and we don't have the breezes. They don't feel as strong because the way it curves down around LA, the way the ocean or the land curves. So San Diego is a little more straight, and so it's a little more direct. And we have a lot of things going on. So let me ask you this. So your husband's in the military. How long have you been moving around?
So he just said it the other day. I was like, wow, 15 years we've been moving.
Okay.
And we thought we would do like 3 years and see how it was. I met him before he joined the Navy. We're both physical therapists by trade. So we met in school before he joined. And I was like, well, let's just try it for 3 years and see. And then it was, well, let's do it for 10 years because you can get a GI Bill to give to your children after 10 years. And so we're like, well, let's go for 10. And now here we are at 15. So it's amazing
you're going
how
the whole
quick
shebang,
it goes.
right? I mean, you're getting close to the other end. I mean, I have a friend. Well, I have several authors I've actually interviewed on the podcast, and a friend who I just talked to last week. And her husband, they started off with the same thing. And when they got to about the 15 years, he's like, well, I'm just going to stay till retirement at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you're only to 20 at that point. It's only 5 more years, which seems like a blink of an eye when you've done 15. So yes, absolutely.
So have you been abroad, or where have you been stationed?
Yeah, we've been so lucky. Our first duty station was Hawaii. So that like sold us right away. We get to live in Hawaii. And then we moved to Virginia Beach, and then we went to Sicily for 3.5 years, which was fantastic. And then we've been here, and we've been kind of on the West Coast. We've been here to Washington State and back.
Okay. So you have been really lucky. Like that, there's no bad placements there. I'm just going to say this, don't do the Air Force. There's a lot of bad placements there. So they all seem to...
That or the Army, I think. Even Marine Corps. I feel like at least Navy are on the coast. So it's going to be fairly decent.
There's a lot of... The Air Force seems to be a lot of Colorado, Ohio, back and forth. I know a lot of people who've done that. So the origin or the inspiration for doing Bookish Flights came from this, let's say, constant moving. Let me ask you this. I don't know about physical therapy, so I'm just going to ask, do you have to be licensed in every state like every other? Okay.
Yes. So you hit the nail on the head. It was born out of this constant moving. And I decided I was sick of the hamster wheel. I do a specialty of physical therapy. I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist by trade.
Okay.
And a lot of companies, it's like an up and coming field. And so a lot of companies don't have programs like that. So essentially we moved to a new place. I have to transfer my license to that state. and then I'll get hired by a company that wants to build out that program. So I'll build out that program and I'll train someone like who's going to be my replacement, because you don't have to disclose that you're a military spouse, but I'm just an honest person to a fault, where I'm like, I mean, I'm just going to let you know I'm leaving in 3 years. So, but I will build you this program. I'll train someone and then I'll leave. And I just kind of got tired of that. You know, every time I'm starting over when we move, like the beauty of my husband's job is his transfers, right? Like he's not going back to square one every time we move. Right. And at that point now, you know, we've added some kids. We have 3 kids now. And I'm like, that just seems like so much work to then get up and leave in 2 years or 3 years. And COVID had happened as well. Oh, yeah. And we were living overseas. So we kind of knew I wasn't going to be able to work overseas. So it just was this perfect storm of, oh, we'll go back to work. You know, I'll go back to work when we return to the States from Sicily. And then COVID was happening. So then it was a whole nother year off of work because nothing was open. Right. And, you know, and not to beleaguer the point, but then we moved 3 summers in a row, San Diego to Washington and back. And I was like, I'm not going to go to a clinic for 1 year. Cause then again, I'm like pushing my 3 kids out to new daycares, new schools. And I was like, that's a lot to ask young children to change that every year. So I decided to stay at home. And then I had the itch though, that I wanted to use my brain outside of being mom. So I was like, I think it's time that I make something creative. And my husband was on a 7-month deployment at the time. And this was 2020. You know, you're at home, your family can't get to you. You're kind of just like in your own bubble. And I was like, well, what could I do? So I just started dreaming. Like, what could I do if I had time available? Which I think every mom goes through this, right? Of like, when I get time back, right? We have this moment of like, what can I dream to do? Right. And I thought, well, I really like talking to people. That's one thing I loved about being in the clinic, seeing patients. And I missed that part of it. And then the other piece, I started thinking about, well, what do people call me about? One, I'm an injury triage line. Like people will call me when they get injured. Like, what do I do? Do I need to go to the doctor? Or should I ice it? Do I put heat on it? You know, like the injury triage line that I am. And the other thing that people call me about is books. And because I've always been a lifelong reader, I'm always reading. I don't watch a ton of TV. And so reading is my mode of relaxation. So a lot of times people will call me and ask me for book recommendations. And so I thought, well, what if I start a podcast? It allows me to talk to people. And I thought, well, I could take this 2 ways, right? I could take this to physical therapy, or I could take this to books. Right. And I'm like, with physical therapy, I think I'm going to run out of ideas too quickly. And I was like, I want to have like where I could just keep going with this. And I'm not like, you know, scratching the bottom of the barrel to get something. And so I was like, I can still talk about my women's health and pelvic floor and all that stuff in the world of books. And so hence Bookish Flights was born. So it took another like year and a half after that, you know, of planning and like making sure I had the time, because if I start something, I really want to make sure I do a good job with it. And so I will not start something if I don't think I have the time or the bandwidth to do it. Okay. Okay. So there are, I want to say many. There's a lot of podcasts. Most of them are not books. That said, there are a number of book podcasts. What gave you the idea of flights? So let me say this. So I was talking to my son, who's 15. Yeah. And thinks he knows everything, but maybe not so much. And don't we all at that age? So I was sitting down talking to him about, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this podcast called Bookish Flights. And he said, I don't understand the conceit. And I was like, he was like, why a flight? And I was like, oh, like a wine flight. And he's like, what's a wine flight? So I had to explain to him, I guess, I think I've taken, like, I've been to vineyards on vacation with him, but who knows what, he wasn't paying attention. So I was explaining to him like a flight. I was like, so they have wine flights. And I was like, a friend of ours went to Ireland and the picture she sent us, she was doing a whiskey flight. And I said, I think even breweries now have them. But what made you choose that as a way, as opposed to talking about one book, or I don't know, motherhood in books, or, you know, I don't know, allegory in books, or whatever, some kind of other kind of way to get into that? Yeah, I had decided. So it started out as I had a neighbor that lived down the street and she read fantasy. And I was like, you know, I always say I don't like fantasy, but I was like, I never read that genre. So how can I say that I truly don't enjoy something when I just never even try it? And so I was like, what if we do this book flight? And I kept it to 3 books, because my other thing was I didn't want to have like, you know, we can get talking about books and you can have 10 or 15 books that are mentioned in an episode. And I'm like, I want this to be something that is digestible and people won't feel overwhelmed. Like I don't want to turn the fire hose of recommendations onto them. And so that was where the flight came from. I was like, well, what if we stick with 3? And in the very beginning, it was like genre based. It was fantasy and sci-fi. And then it kind of got to like foodie nonfiction novels. And then we went to historical fiction. And, you know, we just kind of started bouncing around. But to keep it really simple, I kept it genre based at the beginning. And now I think episode 139 is coming out this week. It's obviously gotten much different than that at this point, and a lot more, you know, niche, because I think I don't want to use the word basic, but the more broad we've already kind of covered. So people are getting very specific, which is so much fun to see how people pair their books together and why they chose them. And I think the books they choose, I think they can help tell the story about the person a little bit, because I think these books that really impact you, they meant something to you in that moment, and that's why they've stuck with you. You know, it's like they almost embedded themselves in your soul, I think.
So this is interesting. So a friend of mine did a podcast. She stopped for a while because of personal issues, but it was called The Best Book Ever, Julie Strauss. And it was such an interesting idea because people have, well, not everybody, but a number of readers have very strong feelings about a book in particular. Do you find that your guests have strong feelings about it, or strong feelings about the theme they chose, or the theme? I mean, I don't have strong feelings about fantasy. Like, I don't have strong feelings about 3 books in particular, I think, about any given topic. Maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. I have to think about that.
I would say it's more theme based at this point, because, like I said, it's more gotten away from the genres. Or, you know, I'm thinking of the episode that came out last week. She is a romantasy writer, and she was like, these were 3 books that turned me on to the romance novel, like the romance industry as a teenager. And she's like, and they just imprinted on my mind, which is why when I started writing fantasy, I wanted to include the romantasy, you know, part of it. And so she chose these 3 books that just imprinted on her as a teenager. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Are you surprised by people's choices?
You know, it's hard because I can't possibly read every book that comes in as a book flight, right? I do try to read, if an author comes on the show, I will try to read their book, and then that way I can speak to their books. But it is impossible for me to read. I wish I had all the time in the world, but it is impossible for me to read every book that comes in for the book flight. So I will say I'm not surprised, but that might also be because I just don't know all the books that are coming through in the form of the book flight.
Is there usually something in the flight that you have heard of, or that you've otherwise heard of?
Usually. But there are some times like people will come and they are like obscure titles, and I'm like, wow, I've never even heard of these. But it's great for me. I mean, my TBR has exploded exponentially because then it kind of opens up my world to what else is out there. And after the fact, I always try to go read at least one book from a book flight that someone brought. So I don't necessarily read it before the show, but I will, like, it gets added to my TBR. And I absolutely love going back to people and saying like, hey, I loved that book you recommended, or giving my honest feedback, you know, like, thank you for that recommendation. And I try to, in my mind, like, just remember like, oh, so-and-so recommended me that book. So when I go to read it, I need to reach back out to her and say like, that was a great recommendation. Thank you. And so I try to do that with the book flights and the guests that come on the show.
What made you choose 3? Because I was thinking about the wine flight, because I've been, well, now they all seem to honestly have 5 or more. And I'm just like, I don't know how anybody like sips at these and that doesn't drunk at the end of the day. But what made you choose 3?
I don't know. Maybe there was a part of me in my like physical therapy recesses of my brain where we make what's called SMART goals. And they're specific, measurable, and attainable is the big one in the middle. Like, and maybe because I had been a physical therapist for, 13 years before I had started the podcast, I was so used to like trying to figure out how I can get someone to do something that I want them to do. And so maybe in my mind, 3 just seemed like a really attainable number for people to try. I also think it was a good number in my mind to really explore the fantasy genre. Like, if in 3 books I determined like, nope, none of them were for me, then maybe that wasn't my genre. But
Okay.
If you just read one and it's an off one and you're like, that didn't work for me, that doesn't mean, I still wouldn't rule it out
Correct.
at that
Yeah.
point.
Okay. That's really fair. That okay. It makes a lot of sense. Clearly, we don't think alike. These things, oh my God, these things just never cross my mind. I live in a different universe. What? So,
well, your world, right?
Yeah.
Like you spend your time and I spend time, in my world in the Bookish Flights. So it totally makes sense.
What? Okay. So has there been any book that has been on the podcast that you've read that you thought to yourself, not that I'm sorry I missed it, but this is an amazing thing, and that I otherwise may not have come by?
Oh, that is a great question, because I have had so many books that I have just loved. Well, let's say this. So I'm going to go with a recent read.
Okay.
Because my go-to genre is historical fiction. Like we had kind of talked about yesterday, but I can get burnt out of it. But if I had to, and I'm like, I don't really know what to grab, I would grab a historical fiction. It's my comfort genre. It's my go-to. I can learn while I'm reading it, but I still get a great story. And I had someone come on the podcast last year, and she writes like these dual timeline historical romances. And that was a genre I had never read. So she came on, she brought 3 books on her book flight. I had not read any of the 3. And I happened to be at the library, and Edenbrooke by Julianne Donaldson was on the shelf, and I grabbed it. And then shortly after that, I fell, sick with something my children had brought home. And I was in bed for like 24 hours, and I devoured that book in a day.
Okay.
And it just added that extra element to the historical fiction where there was that romance component, and it brought in the happily ever after. And I was listening to Catherine Center recently, and she was talking about how you read thrillers very differently than you do romance, because in romance, there's going to be a happily ever after. So you're reading with like this hopeful energy about it, where in thrillers, you're like, okay, when's the next shoe going to drop and what's going to happen? And, and I was like, that is so true. And so I was then introduced to historical romance, which I have then dove down this historical romance, and now I wouldn't say devour, because I don't have the time to devour books like I did with that one when I was sick in bed for 24 hours, but it's a new genre that was introduced to me. I know it's not new to everybody else, but it was new to me, and so I'm so thankful for that recommendation.
Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating, because so let me ask you this then. What are some of your favorite historical fiction books? And I know I didn't ask you beforehand. It is a genre I occasionally read, and I do enjoy it for the same reason that you enjoy it, because you're like, oh, I learned about like the North Africa campaign in World War II from historical fiction. I had not had a sense of Italy and North Africa, because that's not when I was in school, that's not what you talked about when you talked about World War II. And I was like, how is there this whole separate part of World War II that I never heard about? And that was through historical fiction when I was in college and had a lot of time to read.
Yeah. Well, and I also think we're not exposed to it through story. So I don't think we get invested. You're not invested in history when you're learning it for school. You're just learning it to didactic memory to be able to regurgitate it on a test. Where I feel like when you read it in a story, at least for me, I mean, I guess I can't speak for you, but for me, it's like, oh, I'm so invested in what's going to happen to these people. And you can walk in their shoes, and you can see like, what would I have done if I was alive in 1943 or whatever era you're reading? What would I have done if I was faced with a similar set of circumstances? And I love being able to do that when I read. But a few of my favorites, it's hands down, my all-time favorite one is The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. I don't know if you've read that one.
I can see the cover.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, do I know the cover or do I not? Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Sorry.
But it's a World War II novel. It's set in France. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about it? I guess I should ask that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's set in World War II in France, and it's in Vichy occupied France. And it's a story of 2 sisters, and one sister kind of takes this revolutionist side where she's like kind of fighting in the background. And the other sister does not, because she has a family. She has a child. But she is forced to house a Nazi officer in her house because it was Vichy occupied France. Right. And so it's these 2 sisters in basically how they fought against the Nazis that were occupying their country in very different capacities. And gosh, I almost am going to tear up, because it was one of the most, I will say it's a very emotional book, but Kristin Hannah writes in such a way that I feel like she will make you cry, but in a way that you feel like protected. Like you're not going to then go sob for a week, but you are so invested in these characters and what is happening to them that she can just draw that emotion out in you. And it is the book that got me back into reading as an adult, because like you said, we go through college, we go through grad school, we do all this other reading. And for me, I have to table any leisure reading in that period of my life because I would just want to leisure read and not study. And
I will say nothing because I didn't table it. So that worked out how it sounds about how it sounds.
So, but it is the book that made me fall in love with reading like when I was a child. Like I just was so taken away with that story. And then I just was a historical fiction fan ever since. So she has great novels. I would recommend any Kristin Hannah novels because she's covered a lot. The other one is Kate Quinn is The Diamond Eye. And exactly to your point, it's also set during World War II, but it's about a woman who was a Russian sniper during World War II. And it's a true story. And I had just never read a lot about the Russian theater of World War II. And so that was an absolutely fascinating book. And it made me go dig down this rabbit hole and watch all these videos and Google like who this woman was. Because I'm like, this is such an amazing story. How have we never heard this?
Yeah, I heard her story yesterday that is a new rabbit hole that I may go down. It's about Hedy Lamarr, who was an actress.
Okay.
But she basically invented, how can I say this? I don't even know how to say this. I want to say it's like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and other wireless communication.
Wow.
And she had to work with this guy to get a patent, and the patent expired, which is how we are where we are. But I was like, oh, so this whole acting thing was like a side note in her life, separate from her. She was an inventor. And I was like, okay, now I'd love to read a book about that.
Actually, I think I've read a book about, I think there's 2 books about her. And I can't think of the title. I've read one of them. I was in the car yesterday. I've read one of them. I'll send it to you after when we get off the call because I can't think of the title right now. But I did enjoy that. And again, like you said, fascinating story about someone that has like basically a dual life.
Right. Yes. And may have had a different life. Well, if many circumstances had been different, not World War II. I mean, there's 10,000 things that have to have been different. So is there a historical period that interests you? Because I know, no, a lot of people I know are interested in very specific things. World War I, World War II. My child's interested in like the 15 and 1600s in Europe, and not, I don't know what to say about that. Because that's not my thing, but he's like between 1066 and 1400. Yeah. I'm like, okay, that's a very specific
I love it though. Very specific.
It's very specific. So but there are some periods in history that interest me generally, but I wouldn't say there's any one in particular that I would go down. I'm fascinated by. But is there anyone for you that's more interesting?
Well, I will say, back to my point, is I do get burnt out of World War II era novels. They are fantastic and they keep coming out with new ones and new stories and they're all amazing. But I do have to kind of, back to tabling it, I do have to kind of set those aside every once in a while and go read something else because they can be quite heavy. I think reading history and historical fiction. So I will mix in like the romance novels and all of that. But I don't know that there's any genre or like era I would shy away from because I find it all fascinating to me and so much different than the way we learned history in school. So I appreciate it for that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this weird thing because this is the one area I sort of think about. Have you read any like Canadian historical fiction about the expansion? Well, it's the time that there was the expansionist era in the U.S., which is like, let's say the 1718, late 18 to 1900s. Oh, yeah. And I had read like a short thing in Canada about that, I don't even remember. It was some kind of like, I don't know if it was women brides or some kind of trade. And I was like, oh, this seems interesting. One day when I have time, I'm going to go down this particular hole.
It's interesting you say that because I just did an ARC read for an author that had been on the show. Interestingly enough, she was the historical romance book flight as well. But it was set in Canada and it was the fur traders of Canada. So it wasn't necessarily about the expansion, although they were down in Minnesota in the novel and it was part of Canada at that point, but it was like the portage, where they like carry the canoes across land and then they get to the next body of water and they put the canoes in and then how this fur trade existed. And it was set in the, I want to say like the 1870s, if I remember correctly. And that was fascinating to me, and just the life and how they would set up these camps. And yeah, it was really impressive. And it was a woman like disguised as a man. She was running, she was fleeing someone. And so she was disguised as a man. And so it was like told through her story of going on this fur trader's route that they would do. So it wasn't necessarily about the expansion, but it's so interesting you bring that up, because the other part of this is because we move all the time. I use books to research and learn about the places we are living. So I will try to read like hyper local to where we live, whether it's local authors that are writing in that area, or it's to learn about the culture. When we lived in Hawaii, I mean, it's so rich in culture, and speaking of invasions of islands, but to just read about how the US really came in and, you know, took control of, they were independent, right, of their island. And so I read a ton when we lived in Hawaii about their history. And I find it gives such a unique flavor to where we live, where I'm not, and you're not just a tourist when you live, you know, we are typically in places for 3 years. So you do get to really experience a place, I think. And I, of course, being a reader, will dig into even deeper through books.
Okay. I did read a book. You make me remember something I hadn't thought about. I read one book. So my son, let me say this. My son has these odd travel whims, and I try to fulfill them. So this is before COVID. So I think it's 2019. He said, "Oh, I want to go see an active volcano." And I was like, okay, like what's reasonably reachable from where we are in LA? So we went to the Big Island of Hawaii. But before then, I read a single book, which I'm not going to remember because this is clearly like 6 years ago, about the Kingdom of Hawaii and its annexation. And I was like, oh, like I don't know if we knew that the United States did not have Hawaii and did not have Alaska, and then they did. Or the same with Puerto Rico or Guam or whatever. So, I mean, I know that these things were acquired, as it were, but I don't think I thought much about the history of it. And I read that and I was like, oh, this is a whole thing. But I guess the other question I have about Hawaii that I still have questions about was the population of Hawaii by people from other islands like Tahiti, and the fact that they had to come on very long boats on very long trips. And I remain, this is like one of the things I still talk to my son about. I remain to this day more fascinated by how they got across, especially the Pacific Ocean, which is not a kind ocean, how they traveled so far without like modern conveniences. Which interests me way more than things like Stonehenge, which I'm just like, people move some stones. We don't know how, but I got that. I've seen it. They're there. So it must have happened. But the boats in the Hawaiian Islands fascinate me. Have you read about that? I'm sorry. That's one of the things I really wonder. I just can't imagine being like, when they talk about these queens, I'm like, so she's on a boat? Like, no. No.
I have had the same, I've like told my husband this multiple times. I'm like, can you imagine like leaving in a boat and not knowing if an island is out there? And it is so vast in the Pacific, you know, and you're like, and like you said, there's not modern conveniences. So, or navigational tools, you know, just the stars in the sky. And they say that's, you know, the shaka, you know, that hand, I don't know if this is totally true, so don't quote me here, but they say that the shaka, if you line your pinky up with the horizon and then your thumb to the North Star, that was how they were able to navigate back to Hawaii. So that's why the shaka is like a Hawaii thing. Now, again, that could just be a story I was told, so don't quote me 100%. But that's what I did work at the local hospital when I lived there. So I saw a lot of locals as patients and all of that. So that was, they would tell me a lot of stories. So nothing is I haven't gone back and fact checked that. So, but there was 2 books I remember reading there, and I can picture the cover, and they were both by travel writers. And they basically one of them went and he tried to basically redo Captain Cook's journey across the Pacific, which also happened, you know, he ended up dying in Hawaii, but it was also in like I think Tahiti, like he was way out in the Pacific, and then he worked his way back and he tried to navigate and do that journey again. Now, again, title is skipping me as we speak, but I can send you those, for the show notes or whatever. But there was another one where it was, oh goodness, he went around the Pacific Islands and just kind of to see the unique cultures and heritages that lived on these islands and the differences between the two. So it's not necessarily the journey or the historical piece of it, but they're both travel writers, and you know how they tend to be quite humorous, the travel writers. So there's definitely some comedy in it too. So I remember them being a good romp of a read.
It's one of those things. I just, every time I think of it, I think, can't wrap my head around it. Let me go back to what I'm doing. Cause it just.
Yeah. Well, I do have another, fascinating historical fiction rec that I read when we lived in Hawaii, and it's called Moloka'i. And if you're not familiar with the island of Moloka'i, this is a true story. So when people back in the day, so I believe this was in the 30s and 40s, when they were diagnosed with what is Hansen's disease, it's also known as leprosy, they were given a notice. So if there was a spot noted on them at the doctor, they were given a notice and a letter saying that they had to be on the boat by 5 p.m. that day, like literally leave their entire lives. And they were taken to the island of Moloka'i, which happens to be one of the islands in the chain of Hawaiian islands. And they were dropped 500 feet from shore, and most of them were super sick with leprosy, and they had no supplies and nothing. And so there's this village on there called Kalapaupau, and it's still a leper colony to this day, because after they decided, okay, well, they had treatments for leprosy, and after they were like, well, you can leave now. You could go back to your, let's say you were living in Honolulu. You could go back to Honolulu if you'd like. A lot of them were children, like their parents had been sent there. And so they were born on the island of Moloka'i, and they literally knew nothing outside of this colony that they were forced to stay on. And if you look at pictures, it is crazy, because they're like this little patch of beach, and then there's these huge sea cliffs that you can't climb up and over. And so there's a book called Moloka'i. It's by Brennert. I will say it's kind of like a basic novel. I mean, it's not the most in-depth writing you're ever going to get, but it tells the story of Moloka'i. And it is, when I tell people this, they're like, what? This actually happened? And my husband and I, it's a national park now. Like you can go, it's national park protected land. So you can go down there, and we happen to have a friend of a friend. So we stayed overnight down there, and we got to tour it and see the church and all the adaptive equipment, because when you have leprosy, you can lose digits, like you can lose your fingers, you can lose your toes. And so they had to be, things to turn on light switches, ways to feed themselves. And this was all that these people had to do. They weren't given any support, and they were just shipped off to the, by the next, within 12 hours of noticing a spot of leprosy, and they were shipped to this island. And so it's definitely a dark part of our history, but I think it's important to read about and to know about.
Okay, this is fascinating. And I have a whole afternoon where I have other things to do. Okay, so I have other things to do. Okay, so
books draw us away.
But I really have things to do. Okay, this is going to be, I'm going back, but what made you choose physical therapy? Because it's something I engage in regularly now that I'm older. And I've actually never asked I asked one physical therapist why she did it. And she used to work out like at the same gym I did. And she was like, she saw injuries and then became interested in that. But what possessed you to choose that?
Yeah. So I always loved anatomy and physiology. It was one of my favorite subjects I took in high school, but I don't like blood and I don't like needles. Like I literally cannot watch a needle penetrate the skin. And so I was like, well, it made me think, well, I want to do something in the medical field.
Not a phlebotomist.
And I was like, well, what can I do that doesn't require me putting needles, putting needles in someone or seeing the sight of blood? And my grandfather was like the bionic man. Like he had both hip replaced, one redone, both knees replaced. And so he had a ton of physical therapy when I was growing up. And so I remember sitting with him, because back in the day you had to sit for 6 weeks, sit for 6 weeks when you had a hip replacement, which is not how it is today. But we would play lots of cards. He taught me all these card games. But I remember just sitting with him as a child while he's resting and recouping. And he's like, why don't you try physical therapy? Because he had obviously had his fair share in his life. And so thankfully I had a friend that his dad was a chiropractor, but he hired physical therapists in his clinic to teach people exercises on the backside of it. And so I started interning in the summers at his chiropractic clinic underneath the physical therapist. And I was like, yeah, I think I want to do this. So obviously you do 4 years of undergrad before you can apply to PT school. So it gave me 4 summers to work at it. And, similar to our conversation yesterday, it was like, everybody was telling me, you need to go straight to grad school or you're never going to go back. And I was like, I don't know. I just did 4 years. I have my bachelor's. I kind of want to take a break and like save up some money and make sure this is what I really want to do. And so I applied to Northwestern because I'm from Chicago. So I applied to Northwestern. I'm like, if I get into the best PT school, then I'll go. And I didn't. I got waitlisted. So I got my year off and I worked in a PT clinic for that year just to kind of really make sure it was what I wanted. And then applied to school the next year and got in. But yeah, it was really that came down to no blood and no needles and something in the medical field.
So this is so interesting because the number of people I know who are professionals who did not know what the job entailed before they did it is very, very high. It's like 99%. So unless their parents did it, and even in that case, you don't always know. I mean, if your parents are doctors, it's not like you, because of the confidentiality and something like that, you don't always, you can't just hop in. So I guess the question is, you really made sure, like you're the first person I've ever heard who's like, let me try this out and let me try this out some more. What gave you the impetus to make that kind of decision? Because most people I know who had internships, they were never related to what ultimately they did. And what I have found, having gone to law school and having friends who've gone to medical school, is if they had known what the job was, they probably would not have gone to school.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about because I don't think I had like foreshadowed, like, I really just want to make sure this is what I want to do because I had no backup plan. Like, I didn't know what else I would do if I wasn't a physical therapist. So thankfully for me, I ended up loving it. And it is a really fun profession. It's really fun to work in PT clinics. Like, I've had many friends come to me, over the years and say, like, they'll go to PT somewhere else. We don't live local together. And they're like, I can see why you chose this profession. It's so fun. Even when I go as the patient, like, they're like, it's so fun in there. So it ended up being an environment that was really good for me. But I will say, like other medical professions, the burnout rate is really high. And I don't think you would see that, in doing like summer internships or being just an aide in a clinic for the year that I did. But yeah, I'm not sure what made me do it outside of, I just wanted a break. Like, I was like, I just did 4 years where I worked my tail off, to get my bachelor's and make sure I had the grades to get into PT school. So I was like, I just wanted a year. It wasn't, but again, I had no backup plan. So if it failed, I don't know where I would have ended up.
So what do you think causes burnout? Because, so in the last few years, let me say this. About 20 years ago, I injured myself and they're like, you should get physical therapy. And I thought, nah, and I skipped it. I regret this, but we can't go back.
Yeah.
So now I'm fairly consistent. Well, age will humble you in so many ways. So now I'm fairly
got to take care of ourselves ahead of time.
God. So if I had known then what I know now, I would have not run like this. I would have not run downhill. I mean, there's so many things I did that just, what was I thinking? So what do you think attributes to the burnout? Is it because it's so physical yourself? Yeah.
No, I mean, my husband and I used to say that because when we first graduated, he's a physical therapist too. And we'd be like, where are all the old physical therapists? And there are definitely manual, intensive physical therapy jobs. Think about maybe spinal cord injuries or someone that's had a stroke where you're really lifting them or transferring them in and out of the bed or in and out of chairs. But, like working in an outpatient clinic like I did, it wasn't hugely, physically intensive. But I would say more often than not, it's documentation, paperwork just kills it. It's like it's so fun seeing patients, but then you spend 2 hours doing paperwork at the end of the day. That's no fun for anybody.
Okay.
And the other thing is insurance. And we all know that the insurance companies in America, I mean, this is just such a botched system, but even from the medical providers. And that's where a lot of the documentation comes in. It's like, you can't just write a daily note. You have to have, the claims, you have to have the justification, you have to be, and they keep coming out with new things that you have to justify your services. And all insurances are different. So then you're like, what, you have literally drawers. I remember file folders. I'm sure now, I haven't been in the clinic in a while. I'm sure now this is maybe all online, but you would have files of like, okay, well, United Healthcare needs this one, or TRICARE needs that, or, different forms that each one needed. And it's just death by documentation. And then insurance reimbursements is really low. So a lot of clinics, I think of them as like almost PT farms. They expect you to see like 2 to 3 patients an hour, which, doing my specialty, I can't go hand off one of my pelvic floor patients. So it's a really good specialty to be in. But when you're seeing, 15, 20 patients a day, that's tough. Ooh. And then you have to do all the documentation on that. It's a lot.
Okay. I see now. When you say this, I'm trying to think. So I've been to like 4 different clinics basically because, well, whatever. I try a lot of different things.
Sure.
Let me say this. The in-hospital clinics are better, but right after COVID, they were not hard to get into. And then they started booking up like they used to. And it's a little harder to maintain that. So those are better. And they seem to care less about that because they have a whole hospital, umbrella like supporting them. It's not an independent clinic. But now that you say this, I'm trying to think, I don't know if I've ever seen a physical therapist over 40.
Yeah.
And yeah,
a lot of them, I think, go into teaching, now, like looking at it, it's a lot of them go into teaching, or they get higher up. So they have maybe more an administrative job. So they're just not on the PT floor seeing patients as much. Or they're, doing continuing ed, or they're teaching at universities. But yeah, it's really, you don't see many older physical therapists.
Wow. Okay. When you say this, I'm literally, because I have an appointment like next week, like I'm literally cycling through my mind, and everybody, okay, I'm older. So to me, everybody looks like they're like 30 and under. And I'm like, why are they all so young? Like, in my head, part of me thought because maybe it's physical. And I have not gone to, there are a lot of older patients who seem to me more assistance. Like they need help getting in and off the bed, or in and off the little step, or whatever the stuff is. So to me, I thought, maybe it's physical because they have to like help these like more frail people do that. But I hear you with the insurance. That's one of the things that many of my friends who are doctors hate. And it has made them go to part-time or do different things to try to avoid that. What's the code?
I think it's changing our entire healthcare system, because then it's like the small independent PT clinic cannot be. And then they're bought up by these hospital systems, right? And they become these big conglomerates.
Yes.
On top of it, which is like a whole nother beast in itself.
Do you think you would go back to physical therapy?
I know it. So we've had this talk many of times, because he's like, are you going to go back to the clinic? And my oldest he's only 4 still. So he's not quite school age. So I'm on this cusp of like, well, what would we do with him if he, so at this point, we're kind of still in the status quo, but it's not going to be too far out where he is school age. So I would only go back, at least at this point in my life, part-time, because I do like the other part of this is I realize the beauty of being home with my kids. And I know that this is time that I will never get back with them. And when I'm 80, I'm not going to think back like, I'm so glad I went to the clinic to see Miss Smith for her back pain. I'm going to be like, I am so glad I have this time with my kids. And so I would maybe go back part-time, but again, until we stop moving, I don't know that I would pursue that super intensely, just because, again, I know, it's like so temporary. We know we're leaving again in 3 years. And so I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's just a lot up in the air. And I see like the exodus of physical therapists leaving. So it's like, is that really what I want to go back into? So
what is it that you want your listeners to get from your podcast?
Yeah. So I feel like, and probably similarly for you, is we start the podcast and we think it's going to be one thing, and then it morphs into so much more. And things that stand out to me that I try to impart on my show or with my guests is, I think books are fantastic conversational currency. And I say this because we move a lot. And so I'm starting over in community often. And I have used books and book clubs to make community every time we move. And I think it's so important. And I think something we have struggled with since COVID, and maybe it is getting a little bit better, but is loneliness in people. And I think books are a fantastic way to bring you together, whether that's just in a simple conversation. It's a great way to be like, oh, have you read this book, or are you a reader? And then me and you, right? We can sit there and be like, what? We jump off the deep end and like, yes, I love this book or whatever.
Right.
But it also, book clubs are a great way if you're more of an introverted type person. Like, you can go and you can just have read the book. You can show up. You don't necessarily need to jump into a conversation because maybe these are new people to you. And you can just observe, and you can maybe drop a line or two about what you thought about the book, but you can just be within a community of people, and you have the shared experience of reading that book together. So for me, it has been, talking about this loneliness and how books can bring us together. And the other part of that is like the loneliness of motherhood. And on those days when you're home and you're with a baby and you can't leave the house because they're napping, or you finally got them to bed and you don't want to do anything. And you can also escape into the world of books, and you can, you can relate to the characters. You can have these like conversations with yourself of like, if I was this character, what would I do with this set of circumstances? And so I think it allows you to transport from your current set of circumstances, and whether that's loneliness or whatever you're feeling at that moment, you can transport into this other world, and you can just be happy and be in that world for the temporary time. And so I feel like those are kind of my underlying themes that kind of come out in the show, just because it's what books have given me in my life.
How you anticipated it, or is it the way you thought it would be? Or I'm assuming you had to made some assumptions about it. Not everybody does.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part for us is being a military family is we have never lived near our family, right? So the people that you would call in like your crisis moment, or when you're like feeling your worst after you just have a baby or whatever, you're trying to figure out nursing, you can't figure it out. And the hormones are all over the place, you're just a mess. My community was not there. Or my established community. And depending on where we were in the move cycle, we might have been the newbies in the neighborhood. So I don't know that I had these like grandiose visions though of what I thought motherhood would be. So the beauty of that is I didn't have these expectations. But the other part of it is, I guess I never thought I would leave Chicago. And so my husband joining the military, and, I don't know if it's okay if I say this, but God had very different plans for my life when my husband joined the Navy, and now we move around the world essentially. And so it's never where I thought I would see my life. So I don't know that it was different. It just has been harder, at least I think, because I've never lived near my family with my kids to know if it would actually be easier.
That's true. I know, because you were making an assumption that may not bear out. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's hard to say, because it's really hard to say.
Yeah.
What do you think causes the loneliness of motherhood?
So I think, again, this could just be a function of moving. So we're the new people. And I think I experienced this more when my kids were young, when they were newborns and you have toddlers and the days seem so long. And, my husband did a 7-month deployment in there. So it's like my person was gone, and it was 2020. So we were told to stay in a bubble. And that was a really lonely year of, neighbors weren't out. We literally moved in June of 2020 to San Diego from Sicily. So we didn't know, we knew one family that had moved from Sicily a few months prior. But everybody's told not to make new friends, stay in your bubble. And so meeting new people at that point, and I had a 4, 2, and a 10-week-old at the time. And then my husband left 3 months later. So maybe, again, it's just circumstantially, but that was a really lonely year for me. And books and dreaming about Bookish Flights, actually, that's when it started, was really what I feel like kind of gave me the mental stamina through the day. And my family couldn't fly out because it was 2020. So it's like my family couldn't even fly out to be with me.
So I'm going to ask you, because I have a single child. I am a single child. My parents are single. So so this is really well beyond me.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Because I don't. So, in 2020, my son was, I guess he would have been 10. I realized that in my head, 8, but obviously that's not, I can do math. So, he was 10.
Sure.
And for the most part, a true delight, because, he can obviously go to the bathroom and take a shower, for the most part. I mean, and have
and have conversations with you.
So it was once I got over the fact that I wasn't leaving my house, like that took a minute. Cause in my head it was going to be a couple of weeks. And then, other than that, it was a really delightful time because I got to spend more time with him than I had in years because he was in school during the day. And I mean, we had fun. We had a really good time. We did some baking. We watched TV. We just had a really good time. Probably way too much screen time because I had screen time limits before that, and that blew them out of the water. And I've not been able to harness. I've not been able to harness it back. Like I was like, oh well, as soon as this is over, we'll be back to a half an hour, and that didn't really. Well, okay, that's gone. So, and I have some regrets about it. But after a few hours, after all his schoolwork is done and school was done, and it's like 2:32, and we're looking at each other, we're like, okay, well, we have like 6 hours to fill. So there was more screen time than I would have liked. But I found it delightful. How did you manage it? Because the children, the age you're talking about, one is obviously pre-verbal. And then the other ages are of varying levels of emotional control and ability to express themselves.
Difficult stages. I think that was where, again, back to reading, is I did a ton of audiobooks. So I would be sitting in, the rocking chair, and I would have my headset in, and I can sit and be so much more patient with of course my 10-week-old had colic at the time as well. I could sit there and rock you for infinitely longer than I would have been able to tolerate with an audiobook going on in my head, because I was kind of escaped. I'm holding you, I'm doing the things I need to do because it's on my headset. Right. So my hands are free, and I could be a mom and do everything you needed. And you're not talking to me at 10 weeks old. So I can kind of go off in la la land with my audiobook, but still show up for you as my 10-week-old and how you need me.
Okay.
And so I think maybe that's the other part of it, is like that mental escape that I feel like you can't always get, like in that moment, right, of that year with a 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and 10-week-old. I'm home every night when they go to bed at 7. There's no one else in the house to watch my kids when I leave. Right. So tons of audiobooks and reading and escapism in that form, I think really got me through.
Wow. Okay, hats off to you, because I don't know that I've had a child, obviously, all those ages, but before COVID, and that was hard enough. Because sometimes there's no adults to talk to. You know what I mean? There's no adults to talk to.
No, for sure. And I think that's maybe what the loneliness I'm referring to is, like the lack of adult conversation.
Just anybody who has a thought that's not about them. And I'm not saying, like, they're completely self-centered, and it's completely expected, and it's completely developmentally normal. But there's only so many conversations I can have about, my son has a thing about butter not looking melted when it's on toast, and like just very specific, like 2, 3, 4-year-old things that, that every day it's like we'd have the same conversations about his feelings about this food or that food or this shirt or whatever. And all you crave, or all I craved, was like, can I leave this house and go talk to somebody not about children, and then talk to somebody who has like a thought in their head that does not involve how the tag in their shirt makes them feel. Or
even someone asking you, like, how are you doing? Like someone to like respond back, and like, it's not that they don't care. It's just they don't have that mental capacity to be like, well, how are you doing?
No, I remember the first time my son came home from school, I don't know how old he was, 10, 11, 12. And he goes, how was your day? And I looked at him and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, you realize that I have a whole life separate from you. Like, it was the most amazing conversation. I was like, huh. And it was, I think, the first time he realized that, like, I wasn't sitting, I call it in suspended animation.
Yeah.
Waiting for him to come home, and then I reanimate the minute he walks in the door.
We just sit and wait for you all day.
You just sitting all day, and then you're back.
Yeah.
So I should laugh because he'll be home soon. Okay, so I have like one last question, or a couple last questions.
I have one more thing to follow up, if you're just really quick. I will say, like, you're like, I don't know how you do it. I think we all, we can just know there's times in our life when you just have to put your head down and get through, because no other option. Like, the only way is to just put your foot forward every single day and just show up, and it's hard, and hit the reset button. And I think we all can look back at moments in our life and be like, wow, how did I do that? And so I think everybody has the capacity to do that. And I think that we all do. It's your own hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It just, and let me say this. Sometimes I have this conversation with people are like, oh, I envy their life, or I envy what they have, or whatever. And I always look at it and I think, I have no idea what they had to go through to get there. And I'm not that interested in finding out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, if I don't know what they had to do to get there, and I'm not necessarily willing to take their particular path to get there. But so for that reason, I don't have that envy, but I do often wonder how people get through things that for me seem like they would be insurmountable. And I do know in my heart, like if I were home with 2 or 3 kids, like I would have done the same thing. I would have gotten up and I would have just moved through it. Would I have had fewer showers? Maybe. Would I have eaten worse? Maybe. Like, there's a lot of things that may have fallen by the wayside, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't have done it. It just looks hard. And children, I only have one, so I have the temperament of one person I had to learn, and having different humans with different personalities and different needs.
Yeah. I feel like that's where I'm at today, right? Is navigating each personality and figuring that out. Because I feel like I'm still learning at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's what I love about children, is they come with a fully formed personality, but they can't.
We just have to wait for it to expose itself.
And it's like, yes, it's like I call it like, oh, look, discovery. But, and that you will discover it, but it's slow going sometimes. So has there been a quote or something that's influenced you or changed the way you think?
Yeah, well, I will say I use it at the end of every show. And now I've kind of like summarized it as book serendipity. Mm-hmm. But I think that every book comes into our life when we most need them. And, there's certain times, like maybe you've heard about a book and maybe you've heard about it 2 to 3 times before you actually pick it up. But I think at that point when you're picking it up, like that's the point in your life when you needed it. And there's so many times that I read a book and I'm like, that was just the message that I needed to hear.
Last question I guess I'm going to ask is, what are you reading right now?
Gosh. So I always have multiple books going on at once. But the audiobook that I'm currently listening to is Cold-Hearted Rake by, I think it's Lisa Kleypas. I'm like blanking on her first name, but Kleypas is her last name. Okay. And it's Lisa. Thank you. Lisa Kleypas. And I had never read her, but it was actually mentioned on the book flight from the episode that came out last week. So here I am holding true to my word. I was able to get it on, hold through my Libby app. And so I'm reading that. And it's another historical romance. And she is a prolific writer, and I've never read any of her work. So I'm hoping that it'll, just open me up to another author that I can dig into a backlist of.
She is very prolific. She has written, I'm dating myself. She's added contemporary to whatever her sort of work. I want to say recently, but that really means 15 years ago. And that has been interesting. And I think some of her books also may have paranormal elements later, which I think is interesting. But the hardcore historical, like that, she's a very prolific and well-known author in that space. That's
speaking of paranormal romances, that's another genre I haven't really dug into yet. Maybe one day.
I know and love many paranormal writers. It is not necessarily my favorite because I have to suspend disbelief on more than one, plane of thought. And then you're just like, okay, so I'm going to suspend disbelief about whether the meet cute or whatever the thing is about the book itself. And then, also, it's going to be a happily ever after, but you can't read it that way because then the tension doesn't work. So there's that. And then there's also then learning, and this is why I don't write this. You have to figure out the world that they're building, figure out the rules of that world, and then apply them to the book. So there are quite a few time travel romances where people meet from different eras. And the whole issue is how they can be together because they don't live in the same, timeline. Right. And then there's
era.
Shifters. So that's two.
I know, that's like the whole other, right? And I'm like, is this outside of my range of what I would enjoy? I don't know. But again, I can't say that because I haven't tried it. So
very well received shifter books, and it's a whole, I don't even know what to say. It's just a whole thing. It's just each like subgenre of romance is very specific, and if you love it, you love it. If you love it, there are quite a few of them. You know what I mean? So it's not, if you love it, there's 50 more. So you don't have to be like, I love this.
Yeah, the beauty is there's a book out there for everyone, right? Like there is a subgenre just waiting for you to find.
That's the biggest lesson I think I learned from a librarian when I was 6 or 7, and I was like, how? I don't know what I asked her. When you're a kid, they tell you to ask librarians for recommendations. So of course, I prevailed upon this librarian in Brooklyn who was probably like, okay. And I was like, how? And she was like, you just have to pick a lot of books. So I don't know, the limit was 7 or 10 at the time. She was like, take all these books home, start them. And if you like it, then there are more like that. And I was like, great.
I'm laughing because we've had like 30 books checked out, like me and the kids. And I'm like, when are we going to hit the limit? Like, what is the limit? We'll go and we'll like turn in 32 books and then like, wow, okay, we had a lot.
No, I know. Let me say this. The greatest thing I love about now, at least with Los Angeles, there's an app for this. Well, there's Libby, but there's also an app for the Los Angeles Public Library. And now at least there is a list of books that I have. So if things get missing in the house, at least I know what's missing. And it's not a mystery of, they're like, you're missing a book. And this is when I was younger. And they would eventually send you a postcard with what the book was that was missing. But there was a little gap of time where it wasn't quite clear what had come and gone. But now it's like, you have not returned X. And I was like, I'm going to go look for that and they'll bring it to you promptly.
Well, to tie this all back to the moving and military life, when we lived in Norfolk, I only had my oldest at the time. And I want my kids to be readers. So we were, avid users of the public library. And we were getting ready to move and all our stuff had shipped off to Sicily, Italy. And they're like, oh, you still have a book out. And I was like, because we have no furniture or anything in our house right now. Like you get like temporary loaner furniture, And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm just going to go ahead and pay for that one because I am pretty sure it is in a box over the ocean right now. And sure enough, we get to Sicily and now I laugh every time because it was a little island. And we still have it on our shelves and it looks just like a library book when I go to take things back. And I'm like, nope, that's the one I bought from the Norfolk Public Library because it got shipped with all our stuff. So we've only done it once though in 15 years. So I'm going to take credit that was, or give myself a pat on the back for that.
You deserve a huge congratulations because the number of books I've paid for is much higher than that.
Well, we have now lost our second book right now. This is only the second time it's happened to me. I'm like, and I'm still digging. They haven't asked me for payment yet, but I'm like, I do not know where this book is. I cannot find it. So I'll keep you posted where I end up finding it if I do. If not, I'm going to have to go in and pay.
I'm sorry. I love libraries. I think they're the best. They have the best mission. They provide the best service and I'm all for them. So, Kara, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, taking the time away from the young children and talking to me about books and podcasts. It's been the best.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on the show today. And can I say, thank you so much for giving me an hour of an adult conversation. So, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, author Aime Austin. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you share, rate, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It will help others find and enjoy my conversations with brilliant women creators. Also, please hit the subscribe button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I'm the author of the Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. The first 4 books in the Nicole Long series are now live. You can download Outcry Witness, Major Crimes Without Consent, and The Murders Began to your e-reader right now. I'm also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. These titles are available wherever books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. My next book, His Last Mistress, is available for pre-order wherever you get your books. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Legal Thriller Author. You can find me on TikTok at Social Thriller Author. You can also find this podcast on Facebook at A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with you soon with more great conversations. Okay, so this is my last question, I think. Well, I asked this of many people. Taking into account all the books you've written, do you think that there are consistent themes across your books?
This expression
that you
that
see
an
now
author
that
is
you
always
perhaps
writing the
didn't
same
see
book
while
over and
writing?
over again. And I do think my books, at least when I'm writing them, I feel like they're dramatically different. But I do think there are certain themes we all come back to, and certain scars that we're sort of always writing about. So all of my books feel like a coming of age, and I think that's why the young adult felt so natural.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're in some ways my characters have to grow up. So I think that's something that you could see across all my books. So I do think there's something to a writer writing the same book over and over. Not, of course, the literal same book, but like I was saying to my therapist, am I only going to write books about people with dead moms now? Because every project I start is about grief now. And she's like, maybe, but not the rest of your life. But for now, maybe. Because the thing I picked up, it was supposed to be this funny rom-com, and all of a sudden I'm writing about grief. I'm like, where'd that come from? So she's like, yeah, that might be. So I do think people do sort of tackle the same thing over and over again. Oh God, no.
Do you ever go back and
you couldn't pay me enough money to
the
do
books
that?
You've written?
No. Well, actually, you could pay me enough, because if they asked me to do a movie adaptation, I would go back and read it.
This is so interesting. So,
no, I have no desire to do that. I just think I would cringe and die and try to buy back the rights to everything, so no one could ever read them again.
Okay. Okay. I only asked because I was somewhere and I picked up a book I had written in 2014, and I read the first let me say 14 pages. I didn't get that far.
Oh wow.
But I thought to myself, it felt very foreign to me.
Yeah.
It was, and I thought, well, I know I wrote it.
Wow.
But I was like, this is a little weird. Because it didn't feel, in my head, it would have felt like, oh, I remember exactly, writing this. And there was some distance that I did not anticipate.
Oh God. Sounds dangerous.
Just a little fun exercise. Should you choose to pull a book off the shelf? Well, no, it's because a friend suggested that I display, take out every book I've ever written and put them on the mantle. Because sometimes when I'm sitting writing, it feels like I'm just starting from scratch and I've never done anything in my life. And so when she said that, I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Wow. And then I pulled one down off the mantle and I was like, oh my gosh. And I put it right back.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It was a little disconcerting. That's all I'm going to say. So
of
I'm going to,
course, this was so much fun.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And I'm going to leave you in rainy, snowy New York while I sit out here and look at the clouds in rainy Los Angeles. I swear, it's just
there you go.
So rarely happens.
I love it.
Now but I got to wear rain boots, so I'm excited. I love. But I want to thank you for taking the time, and I wish you so much luck going forward with branching out into new things, because it's super exciting to try something new, I think, and see where it goes. So thank you, Brenda Janowitz.
Thank you so much.
And I can't wait to see what comes. This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, author Amy Austin. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you share, rate, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It will help others find and enjoy my conversations with brilliant women creators. Also, please hit the subscribe button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I'm the author of the Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. The first 4 books in the Nicole Long series are now live. You can download Outcry Witness, Major Crimes, Without Consent, and The Murders Began to your e-reader right now. I'm also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. These titles are available wherever books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. My next book, His Last Mistress, is available for pre-order wherever you get your books. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Legal Thriller Author. You can find me on TikTok at Social Thriller Author. You can also find this podcast on Facebook at A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with you soon with more great conversations.